So DC Nation, we are officially just a few weeks away from the release of Supergirl and kicking off year 2 of James Gunn's DC universe. So I wanted to make this retrospect to reflect back on year 1 in 2025 to see how successful it actually was now that some time has passed just a year later. For someone to give context and background to each one of the projects to see how they came to fruition to begin with, then I'm going to give my own personal view on them both good and bad, as well as how other critics and audiences thought of it as well. Then lastly, I'm going to go into the logistics of each project like box office, streaming numbers, and other factors to see how successful they were individually. Then taking into account all these factors, I'm going to give each project a letter grade, and then I'm going to give a whole letter grade to the entirety of the year as a whole. But with that being said, let's hop into it. Now, of course, all three of these, as we know, were James Gunn projects, beginning with Creature Commandos. And when this was first announced, this was not a project I personally expected nor wanted to kick off the DCU, and I was not fond of the idea, because I believe they should have started off with a louder bang with a more prominent character or project, and another Suicide Squad type animated series just didn't feel like that for me. However, this is a project that James Gunn wrote before the inception of the DCU, and for more context, Gunn had already wanted to create an animated DC series for HBO Max following the success of Peacemaker Season 1, and after several ideas he eventually wrote and finished what would end up becoming the script for Creature Commandos just a few weeks before his promotion to co-CEO of DC Studios. So this was a project initially written to be a follow-up to both the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker Season 1, set in the DC Extended Universe, but since it was already a finished script by the time the DCU was born, by default it automatically became the first project. But as for the show itself, starting off with my positives, I thought it was actually pretty good. I was immediately hooked just after the first episode, and I love the entire premise of these monsters having to go into this foreign European country and protect this princess from Cersei, who, by the way, I absolutely loved and hope to see more of very soon. And I really loved when the episodes each took turns at doing a deep backstory dive into each one of the commandos. My personal favorites included Weasel, Nina, and Dr. Phosphorus. And honestly, it's probably where I had the most fun with the series. The animation was also absolutely incredible and beautiful, which was no shock to me as it was the same animation studio that also worked on the Harley Quinn show and Batman Capes Crusader. To me, the show did a great job at introducing a variety of new characters along with bringing back some that we already knew. And as for being a contained animated series, it honestly did lay down some pretty good foundations for the future of the DCU, such as throwing us into this already established world full of metahumans, as well as introducing us to the Amazonians and Themyscira for Wonder Woman hopefully in the near future, Rick Flag Sr. and his involvement in the future of DCU projects such as Peacemaker Season 2, Superman, and Man of Tomorrow, as well as Batman, of course, with his little cameo along with Clayface, which we're going to get later this year, and perhaps even Waller if a show ever does get made, which I hope it does. But not to talk about my negatives about this show, as I did think the finale and climax was a little bit underwhelming considering how well it was built up, and I think the show would have benefited from another episode or two to flesh out the story just a bit more. But not going into how the show was viewed by both critics and audiences alike, starting off with Rotten Tomatoes, which scored it at a 95 to 78 critic to audience score, which is obviously pretty good, and a 7.8 average episode on IMDb, so clearly the show was liked by both fans and critics alike. And as for the viewership of the show did unfortunately fail to reach the Nelson top 10 streaming charts. However, to be completely fair, you'd be setting some really unrealistic expectations if you expected this rated R animated series about these unknown characters to have been pulling in massive streaming numbers. However, the series, according to Luminate, was still the most third-watched show in its first full week on Max, with over 22 million minutes, and of course has been greenlit for a second season. So clearly the show was watched enough for it to get renewed, and they were clearly satisfied with the results they got. But to wrap up Creature Commandos, I personally had a lot of fun with the series, despite being something super small scale and contained. Yes, I think the story could have been fleshed out further and had a better second half of the season. Yes, I think the series could have performed better streaming wise, but I am looking forward to season 2. Both that being said, I give Creature Commandos a very solid score of a B-.
Okay, next up is the big one, the true beginning of the DCU.
With Superman, and truly there was no other way to begin this universe but to aim to restore the image of the most iconic superhero of all time and show the world how incredible Superman can be when handled with care and love. Because I already feel like that not even a year later, some people have already forgotten how Superman as a character was perceived by a majority of the casual audience and people online. He was viewed as this boring and hollow, overpowered character. So I am so incredibly grateful that Superman was the first DCU movie, and what many people don't actually know is that back in 2018, James Gunn was already asked to make a Superman film. However, he opted to do the Suicide Squad instead, due to just not having a clear vision for Superman. And honestly, I am so happy he turned it down, because not only did his take on Superman come much more naturally and when he was actually ready, but we got blessed with David Cornsweet end result. We also wouldn't have gotten the Suicide Squad And thank God we did, because this is just one of my favorite films in the genre. I truly don't think James Gunn has made a better looking comic book movie ever since. It's just so shamelessly in love with what it's adapting. And to me, it's just one of the best films in the genre. So I'm so happy that we got this movie. But as for the film, which really had to shoulder a lot and check a lot of boxes, which only makes the way it came out even more impressive, because not only did it have to fix the image of Superman in the eyes of the public, but it also had to kickstart the DCU as this already established world that we're being thrown into, and of course, be a financial success to kick off on a high note. But as for my positives on the film, I of course absolutely loved it. I saw it a bit early during the early access screenings in IMAX for Amazon, and I will never forget that energy in the theater. The amount of Superman shirts I saw made that entire night a summer to remember. And the moment I saw the credits open with the Star Wars styled intro, I knew we were in for another James Gunn classic. It's just a great and simple way to begin the movie and tell us that this world of metahumans has been around for quite some time. But as for the characterization of Superman himself, I thought James Gunn did an absolutely excellent job at showcasing his vulnerability as a character, but also balancing with how powerful, capable, and smart Superman is. And I also really liked the way Gunn choreographed Superman's fighting style in this movie. It felt a lot more creative and intuitive to previous iterations on the big screen, and the usage of kicks and MMA type moves was honestly really cool. And I hope we get to see more of that soon, because people often forget how much of a skilled fighter Superman actually is. I mean, the guy's trained with Batman and Wonder Woman, etc. in the comics, and I would love to see that come to life in the DCU. But David Cornswell obviously gave such a phenomenal performance, both as Superman and Clark Kent, nailing everything from his facial expressions to line delivery, and overall just gave such a charming performance. But after listening to him talk about the character nonstop during press tour, I honestly knew we were going to be in good hands, because he genuinely respects the source material. I'm also very grateful for him, because he is the reason we got Trunks to begin with.
My thing was just maybe they're supposed to look a little silly. Maybe the reason he wears them is to look a little silly, basically to undermine how powerful he really is.
So I'm just so happy that he's going to be our Superman for years to come, and a Superman to an entirely new generation. Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane was also a match made in heaven. You couldn't have asked for anything more. Her chemistry with David was absolutely impeccable, and I hope we get to see more of her in Man of Tomorrow. Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, who I predicted to have the best performance in the movie. I was absolutely right, by the way. He gave one of the best villain portrayals in the genre, and he was nothing short of absolutely menacing, and I cannot wait to see him co-lead Man of Tomorrow. His new war suit looks absolutely gorgeous. The entire supporting cast was also brilliant, including the Justice Gang in their limited screen time, including Eddie Cathagi's Mr. Terrific, absolutely just stealing every scene that he was in. I absolutely just love this story. It felt like I was reading a comic or just watching an episode from the animated series, because it's such an incredible feel-good movie with real-life themes and beautiful messages, and in the best possible way, so reminiscent of Raimi's Spider-Man films, in terms of just shamelessly loving what it's adapting. It just has everything you want in a comic book movie. It has a vulnerable yet hope-inspiring hero who has a really great dynamic with the villain. The villain has very convincing motivations. It has a layered love interest who plays a big role, and it brings the setting to life. It makes the city, it makes the people who the hero is trying to protect a vital part of the story, and in this case, Metropolis. And as for the technicalities of the movie, I really did like Henry Bram's cinematography in this one. He was moving the absolute life out of that camera with all the handheld footage that they did in this movie. I felt really immersed, and I thought he, along with the seamless editing, did a wonderful job at making us feel the impact of the action. And the fish scope lenses that a lot of people may dislike that Gunn used only made the flying scenes in IMAX even more immersive, because James Gunn made this movie to be seen in cinemas, not at home. And the use of the volume on this was also pretty well done, because a lot of films have tried to replicate it, and it's something that Greg Fraser made famous with The Mandalorian and The Batman. However, Superman used it actually in an effective manner, and it made the flying sequences even more kinetic. The score was also absolutely incredible. I love the score. I own the vinyl for this score. I listen to it every day. John Murphy and David Fleming paid beautiful homage to John Williams' original score while putting their own modernized feel on it. Another thing I loved in Superman was the production design. Beth Mickle, the production designer on this movie, went absolutely crazy, because I just love when these big budget blockbusters actually use their budgets for creating cool things. The Fortress of Solitude and the Daily Planet especially were gorgeous, and I just could go on and on about this movie, and I honestly just might make a full video on dedicating to do so later. As for my cons in this movie, which isn't many, but I do feel like the movie would have benefited from a slightly longer runtime, adding on another 10 to 15 minutes to potentially flesh out the relationship between Clark and Lois and his parents. Like the monologue scene about choices with Pa Kent on the farm was just absolutely beautiful. Or the apartment scene with Clark and Lois talking about what's right and wrong and how their moral compasses differ. I just wanted more of that, and hopefully we do see more of that in Man of Tomorrow. However, I do understand Gunn had to play a little bit safe with a standard 2-hour runtime to maximize box office potential. I also do want a stylistically different style for Metropolis in the future, because when I heard Gunn was doing Superman, I myself pictured the more classic and golden utopian look like in the comics and cartoons. However, that is something that could evolve as Superman himself grows. I also was not the biggest fan of the twist of the L's like many weren't. However, I do feel like it only further amplified Clark's good heart by doing what's right regardless of what he thought the message was from his parents. Not going into how the film was perceived, it earned a cinema score of an A-, which is pretty good for a standard blockbuster, and it stands at an 83 to 90 critic to audience ratio on Rotten Tomatoes, which is again pretty good. And it holds a 7 on IMDb and a 3.8 average on Letterboxd, which is honestly really good for a superhero movie. So no matter what some people might tell you, this movie was loved by most people, especially when you factor in review bombings that took place that may have affected these scores as well. And as for the box office of this movie, for some reason it has become such a controversial topic, but it honestly shouldn't be, because objectively it was an undeniable success. And keep in mind, this movie had to deal with a tarnished brand after the DCEU lost the trust of the general audience. And I wholeheartedly believe that given its reviews, it's a movie that 10 years ago, while the DCU brand was still not in the gutter, would have made even more money. But $620 million for a first installment in the universe is good no matter which way you spin it. And with the trust it gained back, I expect Man in Tomorrow to take an even bigger leap. As according to most reports, the $500 million mark was viewed as a threshold for success for Superman and for the movie to be deemed as a success, which is surpassed obviously, as $620 million is well over its $225 production budget, multiplied 2 times 5 over, which is a standard box office formula. However, there is no denying that the film could have done much better internationally. 57% of its total gross was domestic, while its international return was 42% in comparison, which is kind of crazy. But that's an issue that I feel like will resolve over time as the DCU built its reputation back up from the ground up. But I will say the studios do keep a higher percentage of the domestic cut, which is why they were still pretty over the moon with Superman. And at the end of the day, everyone involved, as well as the major trades and box office analysis, acknowledged that Superman 2025 was a hit, and so did the CEO of Paramount. So don't let people on Twitter tell you otherwise, because this movie was a banger and it was perceived well, and of course a financial hit overall. But to wrap up James Gunn's Superman movie, I mean, this film did everything it absolutely had to do. Not only was this just a wonderful movie that was loved by both critics and audiences alike, it was a financial hit and most importantly fixed Superman's image on the big screen. It made people reinvested into this character and successfully threw us into this already established world in the first movie alone. Yes, I do think the movie could have been fleshed out further. It could have been a little bit longer, and the movie, yes, could have performed better overseas. But with all that being said, that's why I give Superman 2025 a solid grade of an A. But now getting into our final project of 2025 with season 2 of Peacemaker, which is something I was looking forward to for such a long time, both as a massive fan of season 1, but also as a massive John Cena fan. Because this season is something that took 3 years in the making, because of course the inception of the DCU and Gunn's prior to being on Superman and planning out the universe as a whole. But I really did like the way they made this season fit into the new DCU, because honestly there was just no need to overcomplicate anything. Simply ignoring everything from the past and replacing it like they did with the Justice Gang was honestly perfect. And overall I thought the season was pretty good, especially with the tonal shift compared to season 1. This one was a lot more serious and emotionally driven compared to the more comedic tone of season 1, and even just comparing the 2 intro songs alone showcases that. I did feel like Gunn gave Cena a lot more to work with as an actor, with all those emotional cues throughout the season, and Cena's improvement as an actor is just admirable because he has gotten so much better over time. And despite this being another self-contained story, James Gunn hyped it up a lot again in terms of setting up groundwork for the DCU, and obviously that came to play in the form of Salvation, which obviously will have some sort of role in Man of Tomorrow, so we just have to wait and see. However, I certainly do think, like most, it was a bit underwhelming. It just felt like one of those finales that turns out there's actually a surprise last episode that's the real finale. And my second gripe goes hand in hand, as I was underwhelmed by the appearances of other characters. And listen, I am all for good storytelling over cameos, but James Gunn himself raised my expectations with quotes which he said other stars would appear, as in plural, more than one. Yes, we got Lex Luthor, but after that we got nothing. So I was just kind of left empty-handed in a way. I mean, unless you count Foxy's Shazam, which Gunn probably does. But for the last time this video, now going into logistics of the show itself, it holds firm at a 94 to 79 critic to audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is a bit lower than season 1, but it does hold an 8.1 episode average on IMDb. So again, it's safe to say that this project was enjoyed by most, both critics and audiences alike. And as for how the season did streaming wise, the season premiere itself did see a 22% increase in viewership compared to season 1's finale, and the series did crack the Nielsen top 10 streaming charts during its final episode, and at the end it racked up nearly 400 million total views. And for a C-list at best character like Peacemaker, those are really solid numbers. But to wrap up season 2 of Peacemaker, while I had a lot of fun with this series overall, I do wish the climax and the ending was a little bit more satisfying, but in the end still enjoyed it quite a lot, which is why I give Peacemaker season 2 a solid grade of a B. But to wrap up this video and year 1 of the DCU as a whole, as we just saw, each project was received well by both critics and audiences alike. Each project performed pretty well given its expectations, and overall 2025 just set the tone right, because it showed us the variety of content we're going to get in this universe. From rated R shows like Peacemaker and Creature Commandos, to family-friendly films like Superman, we know every single project is going to have its own unique tone and story, just like James Gunn promised. With all that being said, that's why I give year 1 of the DCU a solid score of a B+. I think it did everything it absolutely had to do, and I truly think 2026 is going to be even better. Because to see finally the DC brand under competent leadership is just an absolute dream, and it's just what we've been wanting all these years. So with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments what's your most anticipated project for 2026.